Hello, everyone. Welcome to this series of lectures on seasonal or single period inventory management. In this series of lectures, we'll be talking about the idea of inventory management when you're going to place a single order for the whole season. The order arrives, and then you either sell the items or not be able to sell the items or do whatever you can with it, but there is a single selling period. So this is a unique sort of inventory management issue that you come across when you're dealing with supply chains, because a lot of the supply chains, a lot of the inventory management problems that you come across in supply chains involve placing orders well ahead and in advance of what you know is actually going to happen, right? Now, inventory management itself is a very complex and interesting topic. You can probably have a whole class just on inventory management. Uh, so you will learn about inventory management maybe in an operations management class in more detail. But what we will do here today, in this series of lectures, is look at this one aspect. How do you manage inventories where you get to place a single order for the whole season? Now, this is a very common sort of situation that is faced in many different scenarios. The most common is obviously when you talk about seasonal inventory management, you're talking about, say, something like, say, for example, you're selling jackets. Winter jackets will be sold either right before the winter season or during the winter season, and the orders for that are probably placed 3 or 4 months ahead in advance. So there are some styles for which you might have placed orders, but by the time you start selling them, that style might be outdated or some other style is really taking over. So your demand might not be as high as you think it was, or maybe they're selling like gangbusters and you run out of them very quickly. So how do you manage these orders where you have to place orders well in advance, and then you probably have the option of placing another order, or you don't? How do you manage inventories in those levels? So that's one example. Another example of this is, say, something like a florist stocking flowers for specific occasions, like, say, Mother's Day or Valentine's Day or New Year's or Christmas. So there are specific seasons when you can go to a flower shop and buy, say, you want to buy red roses on Valentine's Day. Like, it's cliched, but if that's what you want to do, the you'd go to a florist and do it, and the demand for red roses on Valentine's Day tend to be high. So a florist has to stock a lot of them to run their business. So the idea is that there is a single selling season, which could be a day, a week, even a long period, even a period of time like multiple months, but you only get to place a single order for it. The other example that I like to give for this scenario is, let's say that you're printing Super Bowl T-shirts, right? So let's say that the Giants and the Jets are playing in the Super Bowl. It's not going to happen, but let's say that the Giants and the Jets are playing in the Super Bowl, and you really, really want the Giants to win. Then you print Super Bowl T-shirts for the Giants, and let's say the Giants do win, then you will be able to sell those T-shirts maybe for a month, maybe a month and a half. After that, the Super Bowl fervor has died down, and people are now talking about what's going to happen in camp and what's going to happen in the next season, what kind of trades are going to happen, and all of that. So people are not buying your T-shirt as much anymore. You probably have a month, maybe a couple of months to a very high demand, and then demand just peters out. So you have to print enough T-shirts so that you're able to sell them during the selling season, right? Because you have to have licenses and license agreements, so it's not an easy process to get print these T-shirts. So you have to print them in advance. So the idea is that there is a single selling season for which you're placing an order, you're receiving the order, and you can sell through that season. And we'll talk about what are the different scenarios that can happen, right? So the important thing to remember here is that the level of product availability plays a huge role, because you don't have the option of getting more items, because the supply chain is really um, you have to place orders in the supply chain much in advance. So you don't have a high level of product availability, or you have to manage level of product availability in advance, right? So there are multiple ways of measuring product availability. There's something called cycle service level, which we'll talk about multiple times, or customer service level. They mean the same thing. And there's also another thing called fill rate. How often are you able to fill your customer orders, right? So responsiveness is difficult here. So product availability is the only thing that affects supply chain responsiveness here. So you have more product, which means that you will be able to be more responsive to your customer order. So high levels of product availability means that you have increased responsiveness and higher revenues, but it will also means that you have higher levels of inventories left over at the end, and you'll have higher supply chain costs. So that's the trade-off that you are looking at here, right? Now, one of the two very important costs that you usually look at when you look at uh, trying to figure out the optimal level of product availability. We'll talk about these two costs in a second, but these are the possible scenarios where product availability is important. Now we will be looking at the first two kinds. The last three kinds we're not going to talk about. So in fact, we won't be covering all of chapter 13 here. We'll be covering parts of chapter 13, which I will talk about in advance. And when in next week when I put up more videos, I'll talk about which sections I'm covering and so on. So we'll be looking at seasonal items, sell with a single order in a season, or one-time orders in the presence of quantity discounts. So these are the main ones that we will be talking about. And the two important costs that I mentioned before, is the cost of overstocking and the cost of understocking. They're very, very important costs, and let's let's talk about what they are. So, as the name suggests, the cost of overstocking is the cost that you incur if you overstock by one extra item. Let's take a very, very simple, straightforward example. Um, let's say that there is a person who sells bagels at a train station, right? Now, the person buys bagels, so this shopkeeper buys bagels early in the morning. Let's say they get bagels from whoever bakes the bagels at, let's say, 4 in the morning. They open the store at 5, and by 8 or 9 they close the store after the early morning rush when people come in, buy bagels for breakfast and leave, right? So let's say that they have a 3 hour selling period, that is it, and they get to make a single order right at the morning, and they have to figure out how much to order. So what is the cost of overstocking? The cost of overstocking is the cost of having one extra bagel left over at the end of the day. And the cost of understocking is, what if you run out of bagel and one more person wants to buy a bagel from you? How much? What is the cost of that? So that is the cost of understocking, right? So you have cost of understocking and you have cost of overstocking, and the interplay between these two costs is what determines how you define customer service levels, fill rates, and determine at the end of the day the optimal level of product availability, right? So what we'll do is we'll look at an example from LL Bean, and do a set of calculations based off of that. Now what I'll do is I'll go over this example a little bit, and then we'll continue in the next video, right? So LL Bean, let's say that LL Bean is selling parkas, and these are the demand for parkas that they have. So the demand can be anywhere from 400 to 1700. Now here the assumption that you're making here is that demand occurs in batches of 100. So demand will never be 450. Demand is either 400 or 500. Now this is not true in reality. You can end up selling 427, say, parkas in a season, but we are assuming, just for the sake of simplicity, that demand jumps in batches of 100, right? So demand is either 400, 500, 600, 700, all the way up to 1700. And these are the probabilities with which those demands occur. Now, how do we know what these probabilities are? How do we calculate these probabilities? It's simple. This is based off of historical data. So based on historical data, you know that there is a 1% chance that demand will be 400, a 2% chance it will be 500, a 4% chance it will be 600, 8% chance of 700, 9% chance of 800, and so on. The highest probability here is for 1000, and that demand is 1600. Highest probability is 1100. The demand for that is 20%, right? So that has the highest probability here. And then, of course, the demand goes down. So it sort of peaks around 1100 and then goes down. So starts at 400 and ends at 1700, right? So in a situation like this, what would be the optimal order quantity? How much should we place the order for? So this video is approaching 10 minutes. So I'm going to stop this video here. I'm going to continue this in the next video. So the idea is for us to figure out what is the optimal product availability, optimal level of product availability. So we'll be looking at what is the understocking cost, overstocking cost. We didn't mention that here. We'll talk about that in the next slide. So we'll talk about the idea of cost of understocking, the cost of overstocking, how we calculate that, and some other metrics that are important for figuring out what your optimal level of product availability is. Right? Okay. We'll do that in the next video. Take care.